No, the meaning is correct,
Yeah.
but is it like it's well? What else could you use instead of preacher? Like for a dari, caller.
I've got thesaurus.com right.
Caller, like caller ID.
Caller to Islam.
Yeah, but one word, like what would be a good one word?
Proselytizer.
Proselytizer.
That's the classic, right?
Yeah, let's stick with preacher for now. Okay.
Preacher, I think, is a good one.
Okay, preacher.
You got evangelist, even more Christian.
Yeah, evangelist, yeah, that's one.
Missionary, ecclesiastic.
Missionary,
Yeah, because I was thinking when Wired, I was thinking of Warner.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's
yeah, but it's Warner, but there's also Mubashir, so that's part of Dawah.
yeah,
Dawah goes both ways, so Warner just picks half of it. What about,
Mubashir would be ideal, though, because it goes both ways.
I think preacher is a good one.
preacher,
Yeah.
okay. So you can see he divided the whole Quran into 5 brilliant categories, and he said who deals with each, right? Jurist, theologian, preacher, right? So the preacher gets more.
Sometimes it's the messenger of the messenger, or
Messenger, yeah, messenger.
Inviter.
Inviter, yeah. I mean, those meanings are correct, but like, a good translation, we're looking for words, right? Okay. So, now you can step back and just analyze. Look at how he divided, like why did he divide this way? What did he leave out? And you can see, okay, what are the 3 types of people that deal with the Quranic message? The faqih, the theologian, and the preacher. If you just look at that, who's more important here? Even if you can say so 3 of these things have to do with the preacher. He has more responsibility than the other 2.
He
But
has to know,
but
the preacher
fiqh
has to know the preacher really has to know the rulings and the polemics of his message.
Yeah.
Because otherwise he's going to deviate.
Uh-huh. No, of course.
Well, the preacher.
Specialty, right?
I'm thinking the
It's
preacher
a
also derives.
everyone has to have basic knowledge of everything, right? There's a basic bare minimum everyone has to have. But now we're talking about those who really delve into it. So, okay, how about this? Well, how would you characterize the Prophet ﷺ? Jurist, theologian, preacher, which is more accurate for him?
Preacher.
Yeah, Dariyan ilallahi bi'idnihi. This is Dari, right? So this is more consistent with the prophetic message. So the Prophet came as a Dari, right? And not as necessarily as a jurist.
Because
These came
he had the wahi, so he had the rulings and all of that with him, He had all of that with him, so and so it was just natural for him to be able to do all those other things,
So
Also, فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ فَرُدُّوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ. That's more specialty.
Yeah.
So the Prophet is all.
He's a prophet, yeah. But we're just trying to say,
Yeah.
So in terms of priorities, so everyone thinks like people have in their mind, ashab al-fiqh, the jurists, right? There's an obsession with fiqh in our time. In your mind, the perfect Muslim is the one who knows the ahkam, right? Haram, halal, mandub, and all those things. But that's not really why the Quran came. That's part of it, but it's not the main message. And that's not how the Prophet operated. That's not how the companions operated. The companions didn't care about, wajib, mandub. They wanted to know what brought them closer to Allah. They did it. They didn't get into the details. And what took them away from Allah, they avoided it. They didn't care if it's haram or makruh. Right? So these categories came later as knowledge expanded and academic study,
How they learn about it if they don't learn it? Or like,
How did they learn about it? They learned it from the Prophet. So in the first generation, there was no 5 ahkam. These weren't there. It wasn't. It was just the Prophet trained people, told them what to do. They did it without questions asked. Right? Never did a companion ask, okay, do I have to, or is it something? That came much later. So all these categorizations, they developed like a century or so after. Or whenever the earliest fuqaha came. And there was a need for that. But the operational paradigm of the early Muslims was not like that. That's very important because people miss it. So there's an obsession with fiqh in later times, obsession with theology in later times. So some people think, the perfect Muslim or the purpose of the Quran is to make you someone who can win debates, someone who knows Aqidah very well. That's not really what the Prophet did, and that's not how he came. So the best summary of the Prophet's mission is da'i, wa da'iyan ilallahi bi'idhni. He wanted to bring the message to people's hearts. And that's why you have three of these. And this is inclusive in that, but that's the priority. And there's a great book, I forgot, Darian, Laysa Muftiyan or something like that. So today we need people who are du'at and not muftis or mutakallimin. That's not the need are people who can speak to people heart to heart and bring the message of the Quran. So anyway, that's just some thoughts. You can disagree, but this is a great summary of the Quran. Okay, so that's page 1. Let's finish the second page, and then we'll go into our introduction, inshallah. Bismillah. Okay, so now second page, he has a subcategory: Uṣūl al-Qur'ān al-Karīm fi عرض al-ulūm al-khamsa. So this would be B. So we did A, right? What are the 5 sciences? Section B. So how would you translate that? Uṣūl al-Qur'ān al-Karīm.
The style of the Quran.
Qur'anic methodology.
Yeah.
Qur'anic style. Let's put Qur'anic methodology.
In presenting the 5 sciences.
Okay, Quranic methodology in presenting these 5 sciences.
I think
Okay.
style is better.
Style?
Yeah, because manhaj is more methodology.
Okay. Uṣūl is style, like temperament or
Yeah,
style.
like-
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
نمط يعني.
Quranic approach. How about that?
Approach is a good one.
Yeah, Quranic approach. Okay, so who wants to read that? Anyone who didn't read? This great chance to practice your Arabic. All right. Go ahead.
وإنما وقع بيان هذه العلوم على أسلوب عرض الأولين لا على منهاج العلماء المتأخرين فلم يلتزم سبحانه وتعالى في آيات الأحكام اختصارا يختاره أهل المتون.
Okay, let's stop here. So إنما وقع بيان هذه العلوم على أسلوب العرب الأولين. So first thing he says, this Quranic approach was directed to the first Arabs, al-Arab al-Awwali. Okay, so it's important to know when the Quran is speaking to that group. So that means the Quran will be using their language. So if there's a word in the Quran, you're not going to look up, what this word means to someone living in Morocco today, or in Egypt today, or you have to bring it back to the original Arabs, the Quraysh, and to the Arabs of that time. So that's an important point. So he makes that point. Quranic approach is addressing the early Arabs. And then he says, فَلَمْ يَلْتَزِمْ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى فِي آيَاتِ الْأَحْكَامِ. So for instance, he says, in the rulings, Allah does not present the rulings like the people of fiqh, Ahl al-Mutun, the people of the books of fiqh. Like Mukhtasar, Quduri, and this book, and Umdatul Ahkam, the way these books are written. Allah's approach, the Quranic approach is not like those books. It's important to keep in mind, because when we study fiqh, sometimes we project backwards and we read everything through that lens. Okay, so he makes that point, very, very important. And then what else does he say? Wala?
ولا تنقيح القواعد من قيود غير ضرورية كما هو صناعة الأصوليين واختار سبحانه وتعالى في آيات المخاصمة إلزام الخصم بمشهورات المسلمة والخطابيات النافعة لا تنقيح البراهين على طريقة المنطقيين.
Okay, so so here I'll summarize. He says basically, Allah did not engage in the abridgment like when mentioning ayatul ahkam. So sometimes in later books you have like a different style. You have abridgment of some of the rulings, or you have the usuli. The usuli are the scholars who do usul al-fiqh, right? Who deal with usul al-fiqh, the fundamentals behind the laws. So he's trying to make the point that here Allah doesn't use the approach of the latter-day scholars in all of these different sciences, but He has His own approach. For instance, with mukhasama, He says about the mukhasama, this is the polemics, right? Allah chose to argue with antagonists regarding beliefs that were widely accepted among them, as well as delivering wholesome addresses to them. He didn't debate them like the mutakallimin, giving you proof. This is A equals B, B equals C. This is the way this is the way using logical premises. Allah has His own style. So the summary of this section is the Qur'anic approach is unique, and you can't look at human beings' approaches and the way we approach things. It doesn't mean that's wrong. It's just don't project that back on the Quran. Quranic approach is unique. The Quran is addressing the early Arabs and is using its own style, and its approach is very unique. Okay, that's the summary of that paragraph. Okay, and people will say, okay, why did the Quran leave out this fact about the Jews? This is one of their beliefs, but the Quran doesn't mention it. Allah didn't feel the need to mention it, right? So Allah, in this, He's not trying to summarize. When He addresses the mushrikeen, He's not summarizing all their beliefs. And when He addresses any group, or when He talks about history, He's not giving you the whole history of what happened to Musa at Madian. He's just giving you what you need to know. So that's why don't think of it through the lens of human beings. Like when we present history, we have to give the whole account from beginning to end, what year and all that. The Quran is not a history book. The Quran is not going to do that. The Quran is not an aqidah book. It's not going to give you the complete beliefs of the mushrikeen. It's not going to refute all their beliefs. Allah is going to mention what He chooses to mention in the context of guidance, right? So that's what He's trying to say here, right? Without getting into a lot of detail. And He left out things that He chose to leave out. So just because Quran doesn't mention it doesn't mean it's not there. Allah didn't choose to mention it. It's simple as that. Okay? So this is section B, Quranic approach. Very important section. So A was just listing the 5 sciences, telling something about them. Now B, section B in the introduction, what is the Quranic approach, right? Now section C, that's the last section before the first fasl, right? Okay. Who wants to read the last section? Basil, you read it. Let's try to finish off.
لا تحتاج كل آية إلى سبب نزول.
Okay, so the heading here is, so he says, every verse doesn't need a reason of revelation. Every verse does not require a reason or cause. Cause is a better word, right?
Cause.
Maybe.
Cause.
So this is asbab al-nuzul, right? The science of, what this verse was revealed about, right? Like what happened that made Allah reveal the verse, right? So scholars, they try to link every verse with, what was an event in the time of the Prophet that made this verse come down, right? So he's making a point here. So he has a different approach to asbab al-nuzul, contrary to what most scholars said at that time. So he says every verse does not require a cause. So what does he say in detail? Let's read it.
وقد ربط عامة المفسرين كل آية من آيات الجدل والأحكام بقصة ويظنون أن تلك القصة هي سبب نزولها.
Okay, so first thing he says is many scholars or many mufassirin, they linked every verse with some event, and they felt that event was the cause of the revelation of that verse. So he disagrees with that. Go ahead.
والحق أن القصد الأصلي من نزول القرآن هو تهذيب النفوس البشرية ودمغ العقائد الباطلة ونفي الأعمال الفاسدة فوجود العقائد الباطلة في خواطر المكلفين سبب لنزول آيات الجدل ووجود الأعمال الفاسدة وشيوع المظالم فيما بينهم سبب لنزول آيات الأحكام وعدم تيقظهم وتنبههم بغير ذكر آلاء الله وأيام الله ووقاع الموت وما بعده سبب لنزول آيات التذكير.
Okay, so now he's trying to make it universal. So he's bringing a universal approach here. So not every verse requires a specific cause, but now he says, what does he say? He said sabab nuzul. So he says, there's some insightful stuff here. He says, the truth is al-qasdul asli min nuzul al-Quran. The real reason to reveal the whole Quran. Okay, the reason for the entire Quran.
To discipline the human character?
Yeah, to refine the human being. Okay, so what is so what else does it say? So refine human being. What's the second thing he says?
Dispel the false creeds.
Yeah, so dispel false creeds, good, or dispel deviation, right?
And to extinguish wrong deeds.
Read the Arabic. I don't have
ونفي الأعمال الفاسدة.
Okay, to نفي الأعمال, the bad evil conduct.
I had in my head, I was just to put out.
Yeah, to extinguish or remove, let's say, remove evil
deeds.
Evil deeds. Fasid is corrupt.
Evil. Let's make it very general. So the real reason for the revelation of the Quran, one is to refine humanity. Number two, dispel deviation. And three, remove evil from the world. Evil conduct, evil action, evil beliefs, right? Or corruption. Remove evil, corruption. I'm just summarizing for the sake of having it. So this is the general reason for the entire Quran, okay? Then he gets into little specifics. So what does he say next?
وأما الأسباب الخاصة والقصص الجزئية التي تجشم المفسرون بيانها فليس لها مدخل في ذلك يعتد به إلا في بعض الآيات الكريمة حيث وقعت الإشارة فيها إلى حادثة من الحوادث التي وقعت في عهد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أو قبله ولا يزول ما يعرض للسامع من الترقب والانتظار عند سماع ذلك التعريض إلا ببسط القصة فلازم أن نشرح هذه العلوم بوجه لا نحتاج معه إلى إيراد القصص الجزئية.
Okay, this paragraph I want to do before that, but let's now you read the paragraph. Let's summary of this paragraph. He says that as far as the specific reasons that scholars give in their tafsīrs, he says they're not really the reasons the Quran came down. They just happen to happen at there were occurrences and coincidence at the time of the Prophet. It doesn't mean those verses are restricted to those. He said the only time we need those is when the Quran mentions something that you really don't know what it is, you're waiting. It's like a term, like for instance, وَيَوْمَ حُنَيْنٍ إِذْ أَعْجَبَتْكُمْ كَثْرَةٌ. The day of Hunayn, when your numbers pleased you. When the reader reads that, they're like, Hunayn, what's Hunayn? So now you have to know what was Hunayn. So now you have to go into history, what was the Battle of Hunayn. So in that verse, you have to go back and figure out what happened at that time. But other than that, the verses are general. You don't really need the asbab. They can help you, but that's not the reason he's trying to point out that the Quran was revealed. So prior to that, so he mentions these three reasons, right, for the revelation of the entire Quran. But then he says something else after that about where is it? فوجود العقائد الباطلة في خواطر المكلفين سبب من نزول آيات. Okay, so now he's going specific. The ayatul jadal. So the ayat of polemics were revealed for a specific reason. All the ayat of polemics were revealed because of the existence of deviant beliefs. وجود العقائد الباطلة in the minds of those deviant people. So the reason these verses were revealed because of these deviations that existed. And then what does he say? Ayatul Ahkam. What's the reason for the Ayatul Ahkam? Right? Ayatul Ahkam, he says, the reason for those, وجود الأعمال الفاسدة وشيوع المظالم. The existence of corrupt deeds and injustices in the world. That's why Allah revealed Ahkam. Why do you have law? So because there's corruption, people steal, there's injustice, so you need law to set people straight and set the limits. To allow people to operate between each other, right? So that's the reason for the revelation of Ayatul Ahkam, because of injustice in the world. The reason for polemics, because of corrupt ideas and corrupt thoughts about God. Okay? And what else does he say?
But what about rulings such as the ayat of cleanliness, of tahara? Can this really be revealed? How does he explain the ahkam regarding tahara if he's attributing it to the existence of corrupt deeds?
Okay,
things
I mean,
like that aren't necessarily
okay,
directly tied to the
so dig into that idea. Like, what is tahara in the life of a human being? Tahara is like it's a mindset. What does tahara lead to? Why do we have tahara? To worship, right? Tahara is a prelude to worship. So that's the reason. That's one of the reasons we have tahara from from the wudu and the fiqh perspective. Why do we worship? Because we need to elevate our conduct. We need to elevate our to refine humanity. Because that's our purpose, finding our purpose. So in general, he's talking very general in a philosophical way. It's all related, but it doesn't mean he's not trying to say every hukam has to do with there's an injustice trying to remove. But for him, it's all related. If you read Hujjatullah al-Baligha, he'll go into details. Why is it that you have wudu? Why is it what is hadith talking about? There's a hadith about braids, so that you can't tie your braids when you go down in sajda. Very strange hadith, and scholars have tried to interpret in different ways. He has a brilliant way of looking at it. He talks about shoes. Why is it that we can wear our shoes in prayer? And he gives the ultimate reason is tied to these broad categories. So yeah, it is related, but you have to really think in a philosophical, fundamental way to find those links.
Is he saying that the events in which the verses came down, they're irrelevant? They're not tied together? The event and the verse?
He said they're not. He's trying to say they're not essential.
They're not essential.
Yeah, that's the point he's trying to make. It might be a little controversial. Like, whoa, why is it not essential? But if you think about it, if you do make it essential, then kind of reduce them, and then how is that Quran relevant to you if it came down for the mushrikeen, right? And you're like, oh, I don't do shit. I'm not Christian. I'm not Jewish. I'm not this. So then none of the Quran will be relevant to you. Maybe just a few verses. So you can use those to understand the Quran, but they're not essential to the meaning of the Quran. They're not the real reason the Quran was revealed. That's what he's trying to say. So the way Sabab Nuzul has been traditionally presented, this is the reason for the revelation of the verses. He disagrees. He says that's not the reason. This is the reason in his mind.
But he's saying you can understand through.
Yeah, he's not saying don't read about it, but he's saying these aren't the reasons. So.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of Muslims, they speak about the qa'ida, al-ibra bi-umum al-lafz, la bi-khusus as-sabab.
Yeah. So
That you consider basically the general meaning, not the cause of the revelation.
yeah. So even when you look at that science, perhaps some people exaggerate, go too far. I mean, I've seen people do that, but generally, most scholars, even that present it, they do it in a way they remind you, well, we take the general message of the Quran, al-ibra bi-umum al-lafz, la bi-khusus as-sabab, not from the particular circumstance, right? So we said, okay, the reason for ruling, reason for polemics, and then he says, for ayyamillah. So he's going to tell you the reason for each of these. So reminder of God's blessing, the reason Allah revealed those verses. Adam tayaqqudhihim wa tanabuhihim bi ghayri dhikri ala illah. People's ghafla. People are, heedless. They don't know Allah. They don't know His blessings. Because people are in that state of heedlessness of Allah's blessings, that's why Allah revealed these verses. Tadhkir bi ala illah. And then for him, I guess, so he says, at-tadhkir bil-maut. He says the reason for that is because the existence of death and the hereafter, because it exists, and there is a life to come. That's why Allah revealed the verses about death and hereafter. Does he say anything about
I also read the rest of it.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, what I mentioned, so he combined these two. The reminder of God's blessings and God's days is because of the heedlessness of people. They forget Allah Azza wa Jalla, they forget His blessings, they forget what happened. That's why Allah revealed these verses. And death and afterlife, Allah revealed these verses because they're a reality that will come. Okay. And at the end, the last line, did you read the whole thing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The last line, the translation, that'll answer your question. Otherwise, it is necessary for us to explain these sciences in such a manner that it does not call for the narration of irrelevant stories. For him, much of what's related in Sabab Nuzul is irrelevant. So he says it outright. So he believes a lot of it should not even be considered.
What is he? How does he exactly term it? He says,
Okay, he says, فلزم أن نشرح هذه العلوم بوجه لا نحتاج إلى إيراد القصص الجزئية. So, I mean, I guess this is a translation, but he says we need to present these 5 sciences in a way that we don't need لا نحتاج إلى إيراد, by bringing the specific stories, القصص الجزئية, those peripheral stories. So we should present it without needing that, right? Needing all of that. And that is the end of the introduction to the first chapter.
Maybe you're just saying to not overemphasize it, because if Allah mentions it, that means it is important. But to not overemphasize, like you're saying, what I understand is that if you were to mention the general meanings without linking them to the events, but then you're not mentioning something that Allah mentioned, so...
No, but he says except for the verses where there's a specific event mentioned, where the sami', the reader and the listener, when he sees that, then it keeps his ear open. Okay, what is this about? So, you know, sa'ibatin wala wasilatin wala hamin, things like that. You know, those practices of jahiliyyah that are mentioned. Of course, he will never deny. To understand that, you need to go back to what those things were.
Nahtaj means that.
From haja. Haja is need, right?
Oh.
Nahtaj, we need. So we don't need those stories.
I'm a little confused about the phrase, this is a juz'iyya, yani impartial stories, or like...
No, juz'iyya is like kulli is like fundamental, juz'i is peripheral.
Okay.
Like the minor stories,
Okay, yeah.
or secondary stories. Not fundamental stories like the seerah or like, you know, those, you know, secondary stories. Or incidents, not stories. In English is not that good.
I feel like a lot of, when we study tafsir today, you know, we do focus on, occasionally on, you know, asbab al-nuzul, but I feel like, you know, we do try to derive general principles. Was this more of a problem than it is today? Can we improve in that respect?
Allahu A'lam. I mean, this is 18th century India and the Muslim world. In 1700, what was the state of the world at that time? I mean, prior to him, you know, in the books, in tafsir, when you read books of tafsir, there is an overemphasis of it, without doubt. So you have books like, you know, Asbab al-Nuzul, so many books written about Asbab al-Nuzul, and they try to find for every verse some Sabab Nuzul. It doesn't work, it's kind of like a stretch.
So when he's speaking, saying that this is a problem or this is prevalent, is he referring to the scholarly discourse or to the public discourse? Like,
scholarly, because he's talking about the, you know, Sabab Nuzul is not a public discourse. Like, it's not like common persons talking about Asbab Nuzul. It's because he's speaking to scholarly. His whole life was speaking to a scholarly audience. He grew up in a seminary, and then he taught in the seminary. He interacted with scholars, and he trained scholars. So he wasn't a dari in the masajid talking to common people. So he's writing generally for scholars. Right? So, and in the beginning, right, muqaddimah. To answer your question, go back to the muqaddimah. What did he say? He said, these are beneficial points for the student and the scholar of Qur'anic sciences. That were you to read thousands of pages, you won't find them in this short manner I've summarized for the scholar. So, okay, let's take a break. It took longer than expected, inshallah.
Also